Ohayo, Emma.
Ohayo, Emma.
The over-under says the kids are worm meat. Hello and welcome again to Oldtaku New Tricks, where there is nothing but spoilers from here on out. Yeah, before I can get started on the discourse, I have to clear the air and mention that I'll be spoiling the plot of the season, not because I necessarily want to, but because the premise of the show itself hinges on surprise and revelations. Yep, it's one of those kinds of anime. So if you're here and haven't seen The Promised Neverland but want to know my general thoughts, it's a damn good anime, but almost in spite of itself in its stupid turns. So heed my warning accordingly because the spoilers start now. So coming into the show, I expected it to be one of two things. Either it's going to be a heartwarming show about a woman raising an orphanage full of children in hopes that they might find a loving family and a house to call home, or death! It just follows a train of logic that watching a lifetime's worth of anime has prepared me for. If you see children in anime, it's either going to be cutesy pap or downright sadistic. And The Promised Neverland lands squarely in the latter. In all honesty, I am a bit perturbed at the binary outcome of these two paths, but what helps Neverland, in my opinion, is the approach it takes to the cruelty. It's less watch these kids meet their inevitable bloody and graphic death, and more watch these kids figure out a way to escape their inevitable bloody and graphic death. If I were to put it bluntly, the anime is sort of like if The Great Escape were a Grimm's fairy tale. An original Grimm's fairy tale.
私が鬼よ。みんな逃げ切ってね。
Taking the place of Steve McQueen is Emma, a bright and energetic 11-year-old girl who, along with a cavalcade of children, are raised in a pastoral, almost too perfect setting. Reason being for such a setting, and widely unknown to the children, is that they're being raised for the sole purpose of being food to monstrous beings. Emma, as well as a few other of the children, become aware of their fate, and thus begins a season-long cat-and-mouse game where they must keep up appearances while secretly divining a plan to escape with all the children, all the while avoiding the knowing gaze of Mother Isabella. Right off the bat, I have to make it known that Isabella is one of my new favorite villains in anime. Up until the end. She's a scheming, duplicitous woman who seems to not only do her job in basically raising these children to be butchered, but also seems to take a perverse pride in doing so.
ああ、かわいそうに。私のかわいいエマ。だから諦めてと言ったのよ。
Her characterization stirs a raw hatred in the audience, the kind that seems to boil in the pit of your stomach. The show does a commendable job in leaning into Isabella's detestable nature, and the reason why it's commendable is because villains as hateful people are becoming fewer and further between. Really ask yourself, when was the last time you truly hated an antagonist in a TV show or movie? And no, Game of Thrones doesn't count. It may seem simplistic to think of antagonists only as hateful people who need their karmic punishment sooner than later, but they are antagonists for a reason. And as villains become more and more sympathetic, or fleshed out as it were, that visceral feeling of hatred is watered down. It's hard to muster up feelings of loathing if you can kind of see where a villain is coming from after all. But let me ask you this. If somebody is knowingly raising children just so that they might be killed for their meat, do you really want to sympathize with this person? At a certain point, the actions of a character goes beyond the pale and whatever motivation or backstory they might have becomes irrelevant. And while that line might differ from person to person, I'm pretty damn skippy that child farming, for lack of a better term, crosses it. To that end, The Promised Neverland does well in keeping the intent of Isabella and her role in the story firmly within that space of teeth-gnashing hatred. Every time you see her malevolent gaze or her painted smile as she outmaneuvers Emma and the other children, just puts your piss to a boil. That is, until the end. I still don't understand the thinking behind trying to frame Isabella as a tragic figure the way the show wound up doing. For the entire season, Isabella was a cold, calculating, for-profit monster that was just as culpable and as responsible for these children's deaths as the creatures are for eating them. But then all of a sudden, seeing the children thwart her and escape the farm causes her to reflect on her own time spent being raised in the farm herself and becoming a cog in the system. And it makes her realize the evil she has participated in? Honestly, who cares for what reason she did what she did? Survival? Jealousy? It just doesn't matter. Especially if it all culminates in such a weak face turn.
いってらっしゃい。気をつけてね。
I just don't buy for one moment that after everything she's done, she would realize the error of her ways when witnessing that escape was always possible, especially if they were ostensibly conditioned from birth to think in such a way. This term doesn't erase her presence in the story leading up to the end, but it certainly contributes to the wet thud of an ending. By far and away, the most irritating part of the show are the many gotcha moments where it just seems like the anime is trying to be clever, but it all just comes off like it's being too proud of itself. As any of you who've seen Death Note can attest, the most unbelievable and downright silly moments are when Light and L are trading, "Well, I knew you were gonna do this, so I did that," and "Well, I knew you were gonna do that, so I did this." But imagine if there were half a dozen Lights and L's and a few Nears while we're at it, and you pretty much have the entire character dynamic of The Promised Neverland. As the series progresses from episode to episode, plans are hatched, plans fail, and wild cards are introduced and disrupt everyone's machinations. It keeps the viewer guessing, yes, but at a certain point, not one, not two, but 3 different characters, completely independent of each other, seem to somehow combine to plan the perfect escape. From Ray's last-ditch effort to burn it all to the ground, to Sister Crone handing off a few essentials to Norman, to Norman writing his masterstroke plan, anticipating every single minute detail down to the letter from seemingly beyond the grave like this were the Book of Henry. It's textbook ridiculous. By the way, I say seemingly from beyond the grave because, well, you know, second season and everything. I suppose this couldn't really be helped because such a unique and unbelievable conceit demands an equally unique and unbelievable solution. But it's still one of the boat anchors that keeps the show from reaching the heights it could have. That, and I feel like the children themselves are kind of hollow and take too much of a backseat to the goings-on of the plot. The few adult characters are easily the most compelling and interesting in the entire cast, but that's really easy to do when the rest of the cast are one-note children whose naivete are constantly challenged, when they're not formulating plans they would have no way of accounting for. Am I right, Mr. I Can Remember Being a Fetus? That is some high-octane bullcrap that I am shocked made it past the rough draft stage. But beyond Ray's magical intellect or Norman's equally magical sense of forethought, Emma's dogged determination to save everyone is honestly the most childish aspect of the entire show. Her complete unwillingness to let the reality of her situation temper her expectations of what can and cannot be done is both annoying, but also thematically appropriate. It's annoying because the show keeps luring you into thinking that there's going to be some kind of consequence to Emma's naivete, but there just really isn't. Nothing lasting anyway. At most, you can argue that her need to save everyone almost blew the plan at a certain point, or that it led to her leg being broken by Isabella, but the plan is carried out regardless, with the only concession being that Emma will come back for the kids that had to be left behind because they were simply too young. Hardly a compromise. But thinking more on it, I do feel like there is some merit behind it when you consider the title of the anime itself. It's fairly obvious to draw the comparison of Neverland, a make-believe world where children never have to grow up, and the farm itself. But children do grow up here on the farm. They are just shipped out to be eaten before they grow too old. Even Isabella, as a caretaker, grows old and might one day become a so-called grandma that oversees other farms. Time has no inertia here like you would expect in a so-called Neverland, so what could this promised Neverland be referring to? To me, though, I think it's less about a physical place and more like a mental state of being. About keeping the mentality of a child. While it's Norman's intelligence that winds up saving the children, it's Emma's labeled immature brashness and stubbornness that wills Norman's successful plan. All throughout the show, Emma's naivete is mocked and derided as being a character flaw, but it's that same naivete that saves them.
エマの弱点は優しいところ。
If Emma got with the program and realized that the best course of action was to save herself and her small group of friends, or did what Isabella told her to and just gave up and lose her youthful faith,
抗うから辛い。受け入れるの。楽になれるわ。簡単よ。
then the children wouldn't have escaped. Again, I don't like the execution of these thematic choices, but I do like the ideas of it. And in a grander scale, I think that summarizes my thoughts on the show as a whole, that while I appreciate and like the ideas at play here, and while Isabella is a magnificent bad guy that drives the plot forward, the execution and head-scratching turns keep me from enjoying the show as much as I want to. In that way, The Promised Neverland is kind of frustrating because lost potential always is, but at the same time, I did enjoy my time watching it. Suffice it all to say, I'm on board for Season 2, which is one of the unwritten jobs of any Season 1. But that's just what I think. What did you all think of The Promised Neverland?